Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to Presence. I am Doug King. Glad to be with you today. Very excited to be with you today as we continue on with all the activity. And the activity is as high, well, it's higher than it's ever been, as so many different groups are now coming together for this global conversation. And that's a lot more opportunity for presence because we've been pushing for a global conversation, a more universal conversation for quite some time now. So as I had mentioned in the last week's newsletter, when we were setting up the last podcast we were involved in for World Unity Week, which I was proud to participate in, that, in fact, I would come back this week with some more news. So as I thought about this whole thing, it really always comes back to the biblical narrative, where it is, and how much excitement I'm feeling for the biblical narrative itself. And it really stood out to me when I received an email that had more research, statistics, and studies about the state of the union, if you will, with regard specifically to the world religion, Christianity. And what this survey said was that they questioned 1,000 Protestant pastors, variety of questions. And one of them was, what is the biggest challenge that you currently face today as a pastor in your church? What is the biggest challenge? And the number one answer that was actually twice as much as any other of the 5 challenges they mentioned was apathy. And I just thought to myself, wow, I've never been more excited about the biblical narrative and what it's contributing to this movement that's going on right now, this world unity movement. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about the concept of convergence, a huge convergence movement that's happening right now and the excitement around it. And here I'm reading this thing where pastors are saying their biggest problem is apathy. That's something that we need to read those tea leaves, pay attention. And in fact, spiral dynamics, I've used it because first and foremost, we have to remember spiral dynamics is not a religious model. It's simply a socio-psychological model that is based on history and the evolution of worldviews. And it's used across many disciplines. As a matter of fact, no one was using spiral dynamics, to my knowledge, when it came to the biblical narrative. And it pretty much stays that way right now, what we're doing. And don't you think that's a little strange that spiral dynamics and worldviews and evolution works in business, and it works in economics, and it works in people who do political consulting and all these other fields? Wouldn't it make sense that these same models, if it works everywhere else, should have some application to our understanding of the narrative? But one of the things that is problematic in my mind is when you're talking about a closed system. And what I mean by that is when Christianity becomes a closed system, there is no application from outside models that really works or that has any appeal. What people typically read, and I think that probably most of us have had this conversation. I'm not saying anything new here at all, but I've heard many people say, yes, most Christians go to Christian bookstores and they read the books that support what they already think. It's a closed system. And what that means is the resultant division never ends. And the reason why is because, well, nothing ever changes. So the great thing about the spiral is that it is outside of religious arguments, specifically denominational arguments. But this model calls separation into question. It explains why separation exists, why people are divided. So I really like that. As far as science goes, here again, we have another field of study. One of the most exciting fields of information currently is the James Webb Telescope. All the articles daily, it seems, on all the more recent discoveries in physics, our universe. Amazing. And then you add to that books like Dr. Jude Currivan's Cosmic Hologram, where Jude lists all of the experiments that have happened just in the last decade that, as she says, has provided information that turns previously long-held paradigms on their head. Evolution, we're learning more. And what's the direction? The direction is interconnectivity. The direction is unity. It's pulling people together from all over the planet. That is the opposite of being involved in things that create separation, which is to say, well, the word denomination. So when you're thinking about quantum physics, for example, the most recent excitement, and one that Presence is in the thick of, is the concept of the Holomovement. I brought it up before. It's a term from David Bohm, who passed away in the 90s. And that work was continued on to this very day, and now is very much part of mainstream physics, because the Holomovement details the evolutionary principles behind the formation, the organization of our universe. It is the compelling, amazing story of our universe. And Jude has written 2 books actually recently. Yes, Cosmic Hologram, but she's also written the story of Gaia, and they go into quite a bit of detail about it. So now what's happened? Well, first of all, you already know that I was invited to contribute a small piece in a book entitled The Holomovement, Embracing Humanity's Unity. And in this book, there are literally 40 different contributors from diverse fields of study who have contributed to a book that is talking about the way in which our universe is based on unity, and how people from psychology, philosophy, business, global economics, politics, the arts, yes, even the arts are involved. People in the arts, music, painting, poets. These diverse fields are realizing that the Holomovement, which is the physics of our universe, is a foundational reflection upon all fields of study. And I'm not going to get into that in detail today. So if you're feeling like I still don't understand what it is and how do you define that, well, that's why I said previously that I intended to do and will be doing a whole series on the biblical narrative as Holomovement. Right now, we are participating in these conversations the evolutionary leaders, all of its many synergy circles, the people within that. Right now, I believe there's 240 plus people in our various synergy groups, teachers, lecturers, international speakers, and widely known authors. All of them in many different types of projects to influence and change the world for better. Their most recent newsletter included some of these active projects. And within that, I'm excited to say, was the link to the Nomad podcast that I did with Tim Nash. And that's exciting because people who have nothing to do with the biblical narrative are now hearing about the universal principles. Presence is going beyond the walls of Christianity. We're going beyond the walls of denominationalism. We're literally going throughout the world, but it is to participate on how the world is based on unity already, not separation. So I was excited to do. And I heard from Tim, he was very kind to let me know that in the first 10 days after that podcast went on the air, Tim said they've already had some 7,000 listens or so. And their audience is obviously very much starting with orange openness, deconstruction, moving into green, and people considering now the concepts that would make up an integral viewpoint. This is real exciting. So, the exciting announcement. You know that I've announced before that Dr. Kurt Johnson, who's evolutionary biologist, he's had papers in his field published, some 200 papers in his field. He's the author of books as well. The last one, I believe, was published by Yale Press. And he's releasing a book the end of next year. And as I've said before, he's asked me to co-author that with him. Along the way, he's expanded his thinking to also include Oxford University physicist Dr. Jude Currivan. So the three of us have been working on a Google Doc to collaborate. So we can each contribute, edit, put together our thoughts. And I'm very excited because a lot of my material is being incorporated. Content that I've spoken of for the last 20 plus years with regard to certain trajectories, my application of Venn diagrams in various and different ways. And all of this is being incorporated in what we're doing. So as we've gone along and we've gotten into this, and I mentioned to Kurt, I said, you know, I intend to do a series on the biblical narrative as Holomovement. And Kurt said, here's what we need to do. The three of us need to go ahead and write a foundational piece. It might be a small ebook, something to be published. And the reason we want to do this before we write an entire book that doesn't come out till the end of next year, the reason we want to do this is so that we can take all this work and your diagrams and everything else, Doug, and have this published in a few months and get it copyrighted. That is something that I hadn't even thought of, actually, because I'm just used to putting out material. I'm just used to doing it. But Kurt said, look, you've spent your life developing these things. And when we write a book, we're going to get it copyrighted. Jude and I write books, you get things copyrighted. And he said, what we don't want is to have things possibly even misused and not making the points that you're trying to make here. So let's go ahead and write this and get it copyrighted. So that is the excitement of my announcement. This is going to be something that will be available to everyone, that sets up the basic principles from which I will do an entire series, and further from which Jude, Kurt, and I will be involved in putting out a book that comes out next year. All my basic diagrams will be there. The content from Jude will be there. The content from Kurt will be there. And it will be basically an intro to this Holomovement study. And this is something also that involves this concept of convergence. Convergence is a huge, huge concept. You'll be hearing more about it now from this time forward. It's many different fields of study that on the surface appear to be disparate, separate worlds. What does theology have to do with physics or biology or global economics? But what's happening is these disparate, supposedly, fields are revealing themselves to be holonic, holons, Holons. What's that? What's a holon? A holon is a thing in and of itself, yet it's also part of something bigger. So let's take the human body. A kidney, for example, is a holon because a kidney is a thing in and of itself. People who are in the medical profession would be nephrologists who help people that have kidney trouble. And they know all about the kidney as a thing in and of itself. But the kidney is also a holon in the sense that it also is part of something bigger, or part of a whole called the human body. And I use this example because that's what Paul did. Paul says the body is an interconnected number of parts, an interconnected number of holons working as one. This is what you're supposed to see when discussing the body of Christ. But if you say to people, isn't it great that the body of Christ is not divided? They're probably going to give you a funny look. And what we're proposing is not to get rid of the body of Christ in the story. We're proposing an integral paradigm that radically changes an old view about the body of Christ, a view that has been handed down for 2,000 years, a view that started with the Roman Empire, and that every single Christian denomination, Protestant, Catholic, Calvin, Arminian, everyone that claims to be a Christian is promoting the very same interpretation of body of Christ that was put out by the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. And it's being followed rigorously today. Now, if you're new to Presence, we'll have a lot more about this later. Or if you go to our website, presence.tv, I've done a lot of podcasting on the role and function of what the body of Christ was and why there's no body of Christ today. And if that hits you between the eyes as something absolutely crazy, you're right. Compared to what's been handed down, it is. But again, I'm using models, not just within the world religion Christianity, but models that are used universally outside of it. That's what convergence is all about. What I'm proposing is that whatever your interpretation of the biblical narrative is right now, there's thousands of different groups within Christianity who also call themselves Christians, and they disagree with you. They do not agree with you. And you know what they all say? They all say, no, my interpretation of the biblical narrative leading to this denomination. So what I'm saying is that when you're in a closed system argument, how do you validate what your particular view of it is? And I am using models outside the biblical narrative. Why? Because the Bible's not enough. That's always the claim. Well, apparently it hasn't been enough to get everybody on the same page. So the concept of convergence is spiral dynamics, the Holomovement, are two socioscience, physics, evolutionary biology paradigms that should align in principle with what you're saying is the story coming from the biblical narrative. That's my proposal. And when I do my series on Holomovement, I am going to propose and then show why the biblical narrative, when interpreted in an integral way, radically changes the story, and it needs to be radically changed. We have to have a different view for this narrative to go forward. It's losing the interest, according to 1,000 Protestant pastors, it's losing the interest of the people. So convergence means that now I'm saying, whatever your interpretation of the narrative is, let's take it to spiral dynamics model. Again, that's not a religious model, but if God's all in all, then God's nature should be all in all. The nature of the universe should be the nature of God. If I'm talking about the nature of the Holomovement, I'm talking about the nature of God, for God is the manifestation of the universe. Does your interpretation of the narrative provide a story that converges with all these other fields of study? Because there's a movement happening right now across the globe, and more people are joining it from, again, so many different backgrounds. And it is the exact opposite of apathy. The excitement is very high. Why? Because it's addressing activism that brings about a better life, a more abundant life for every single man, woman, and child on this planet. Our universe is not denominated. Our universe is not denominated. It is not a conglomeration of separate pieces. So that's what we'll be talking about. That's where I will be going in my series. And in my series, it's going to happen after we get this published. So I've got that published. Then I can put out all my charts, all my content. It'll be copyrighted. Then we can expand that, use it in a book. And from that point forward, we can begin to have discussions that are specifically theological. That's where my heart is. I love theology because I look at it through an integral lens and things just jump off the page to me. Danae and I talk about it constantly. We use it in our relationship. We use it in parenting, grandparenting, and all the relationships that we have, starting from the family and moving outward. I don't know how it gets better than that. So I'm very excited about it. So this is to let you know, look, I'm really focused on this project with Jude and Kurt for the next few months. I will tell you right now, I'm not even sure what I'm going to do or not do as far as over the summer here, more podcasting, because this is a high priority project. And after this comes out, I will be doing a lot of podcasting. For example, in the series of the biblical narrative as Holomovement, I'll have Jude Currivan on. I'll have Kurt Johnson on. And these will be video casts. And I'll have them explaining from their fields of study how they see this. And yet I'll be sitting there as someone not in quantum physics, not in evolutionary biology, but in theology, talking with them how we see the existence of all that is in the same way. Wow, that's exciting to me. So that's my announcement for today. I will certainly be in touch along the way with announcements, other things that are coming along. But I would say that you may not get a podcast till we head into September, which I consider the fall, which is not that far away. That's why we have to really focus on our work here. As usual, I appreciate all of the feedback that I get. I appreciate it when people communicate, and I try to communicate back as I have opportunity, and excited to continue this global conversation. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.